So hello everyone, I'm Kaarthik Sivakumar. I'm a principal engineer at Cisco Systems. I've been at Cisco for 13 plus years now. I was at three other companies, very small companies before this. I've been working on the security and trust side for some time now. It's a pleasure being here. I wanted to talk about my views on the security and trust. Some of the reasons why we need security. What is the difference between security and trust? How can we gain the trust of people? What does it really mean? And a few such conversations. So we'll get started, and hopefully you'll find it very interesting. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk about attacks and more, and attacks and so on. We're going to talk about trust. What is trust? And we're going to talk specifically about a couple of instances of trust. One of them being something that is all familiar to us. It's the green lock that we see in our browsers. We're going to talk about that as well. So let's look at attacks and more, and attacks and more. So Kevin Mitnick was a very well-known hacker in the 80s, and he still is a very well-known hacker. And he's written this book called The Art of Deception, and I strongly recommend reading it. And in this, Kevin describes enterprises and any kind of security as being like a M&M candy. M&M is like the gems candy. It has a very hard, crunchy shell, but the interior is soft and chewy. Um, this is exactly like what a lot of our security looks like today. We have a firewall, and we think we put up a firewall, so everything is fine. We are completely secure. All you have to do is break that single firewall, and everything inside is completely open. It's just soft and chewy on the inside. We're all working this way. When we build up products, we just build this idea of a perimeter security, and then inside of that, it's all just completely open. And we think that we have security, we have a perimeter, nobody can enter that perimeter. As a result, we don't need to protect what's on the inside. But that's not how things are anymore. There's a lot of ways to enter into the perimeter, which means that we really need what's called defense in depth. So we'll talk about what that means. I strongly recommend reading this book. It's a very, very interesting book that talks about, in particularly about the social engineering aspects of security, which is, in fact, the best way to enter into the shell is you don't have to actually break the shell. You can easily enter and hit the soft chewy part without even attempting to break the shell, and that's through social engineering. So in the last few years, if you've been reading any kind of news and if you're interested in the security aspects, you'll see lots and lots of news show up about everybody hacking everybody else. I mean, it's not just malicious actors trying to hack, companies or just common people, but it's also governments attacking governments attacking critical infrastructure all over the place. It's very interesting to watch this and just from the outside. But oftentimes what happens is we're now also being attacked ourselves. For instance, as part of this whole being, working from home and doing everything online, a lot of us have been using Zoom, and I'm sure if you've been following the whole security world, you will know a lot about Zoom bombing. Zoom bombing is when people who are not meant to be in the meeting, they join the meeting and then they disrupt the meeting. So my son's classes, for instance, happen over Zoom nowadays, and there's been a couple of instances of Zoom bombing of his own classes. Right? So we're seeing this all the time. It's no longer that security problems are impacting just governments or critical infrastructure. It's impacting all of us. Our phones carry so much data that all I have to do is, if I can hack your phone, I get a lot of information from that, not just about you, but your entire network of people that you go with. So we've been seeing all of these. So the US CERT has issued a notice saying that organizations can no longer rely on perimeter devices. There needs to be complete network infrastructure security. There needs to be defense in depth. At this point, it's not just organizations. All of us need defense in depth. All of us need to protect ourselves from all kinds of attacks. It's not just the perimeter alone that matters. So just a brief introduction into some kinds of attacks. Typically, we've always seen attack the end system. So, and if you've been around for long enough, you know that your laptops, your computers, Windows in particular, used to be attacked a lot. Now, of course, the targets are much wider. Mac OSs can be attacked. Linux systems also have significant security vulnerabilities. And now that almost all servers run Linux, they present a very interesting target. And people are now poking holes into all kinds of all problems that are there in Linux, and they're able to find ways to attack them. And of course, a lot of the IoT devices run Linux. So the moment you find a hole in Linux, you get you have this wide door opened to target all kinds of IoT devices, not just the ones that you may run at your home, not just like Raspberry Pi, for instance, that you may run at home, but also critical infrastructure that runs on IoT. For instance, you may have an agriculture monitoring system that detects when there are, water needs to be, sent out into the fields and so on. All you have to do is attack that, and you can actually critically damage a nation's food supply, right? And think about other critical infrastructures such as nuclear plants. We'll take a look at some of these attack vectors soon. So now people used to attack the end system, and slowly they moved attacking the intermediates. The intermediates are the routers and switches. Of course, there are routers at our home, and a lot of the times we buy these routers, and then we don't change the username and password on them. This oftentimes, if you buy a Linksys, it's probably admin and password, right? So we don't end up changing the usernames on them. But the problem is much bigger when you start looking at enterprise class routers and switches. All you have to do is target a single enterprise switch or a router. And if you have access to that, and if you're able to control that, you now can see all the traffic that goes through that entire enterprise, right? And then you can jump from one router or switch in an enterprise to other routers or switches or to other end systems. And you can now create a massive, you have a massive set of targets for you to go and attack. So from targeting the end system, we move to targeting the intermediates. There are other kinds of attacks you can now target using traffic, the classic DDoS, or you can also target BGP to change the entire routing table of the internet. We'll take a look at an example of that as well. So, but in all of these cases, what you're really doing is when you target an end system, you have to go end system by end system. It's very easy to target maybe a single person's end system. But if you have to target, let's say, an entire enterprise, targeting an entire enterprise means that you just have to wildly throw out these phishing emails, and hopefully, a good percentage of them will click on the link and so on. But if you want to really target an enterprise, you target the routers and switches. Now you can go further and further back. Attacking the supply chain is going way further back, where you go into the factories where the devices are being built, and you directly insert a malicious chip, let's say, or malicious firmware into the place where the manufacturing happens. So when you do that, you don't have to go and actually attack anything that's running in an enterprise. You have already inserted a Trojan or a backdoor while the device is being manufactured, which means that all you have to do is wait for that device to get deployed, and now you have complete access to wherever that device has been deployed. That's attacking the supply chain. Attacking the supply chain is not just about attacking hardware. You can also have software supply chains. And we'll take an example. We'll see an example of that very soon. Another kind of attack is attacking the person. So you have phishing emails, phishing websites, a lot of social engineering. When you attack a person, you can gain very significant and very interesting kinds of information that you can then use to propagate your attack further. These are no way, the entirety of the types of attacks is just a sample. We look at motivations. You have the standard motivation, ransomware. This is the simplest to understand, money. You attack somebody, you lock up or you encrypt their hard drive, you ask for money, and when they pay, you open the hard drive again. That's very well understood, very well known. It's been going on in the non-electronic world for centuries, and it's just been transitioned into the electronic world as well. The second kind of attack is destroying critical infrastructure. If you have been following any of the problems between Ukraine and Russia, you would know that there's a constant barrage of attacks on the Ukrainian critical infrastructure, and a lot of them oftentimes point to into Russia. How Russia is targeting the critical infrastructure in Ukraine, power grids, ATMs, and so on. And that's a very significant motivation today. That leads to the subsequent other motivations, which is one, competitive advantages, and the second is geopolitical advantages. A lot of the attacks that involve state actors countries or agencies that are run by the countries are typically done for geopolitical advantages. So you want to target another country, not just to learn what that other country is planning or their military installations and so on, but you also want to do the target just to bring down an infrastructure. So again, going back to critical infrastructure like the electricity grid can be attacked and has been attacked many times, and you can bring them down, and that causes a significant damage to the entire country. Again, the motivations are a subset of what you might actually see in real life. So here's a typical network that involves some IoT devices, the modern day IoT devices, a switch in the middle, there's a cloud, and then there's a user who's looking at the data that's sitting in the cloud. A lot of the devices that we use, the IoT devices that we use, a CCTV camera, smart TV, or smart fridge, we buy them, we install them in our house, but we never really think about what happens behind the scenes. A lot of us are very interested in buying, and especially in the recent days, I've seen the CCTV cameras showing up everywhere. The police in my city, and I'm sure in other cities in India, are deploying the CCTV cameras almost every 100 meters now. Every intersection has a CCTV camera. Every apartment complex is now forced to install CCTV cameras. We all walk past many CCTV cameras, but how many of us have asked that question saying, what happens to who is in control of the CCTV camera? Who has the username and password to log in into the CCTV camera? Is that something that is controlled by us? Where is the video from the CCTV camera going towards? Is it going to a cloud that is controlled by the apartment complex? Is that going to a cloud that is well protected? Who has access to all the video that is being collected by the CCTV camera? Is it going to a cloud that is in a foreign country, for instance? Is it accessible to governments of other countries, governments of our own country, for instance? We have no idea, and oftentimes we don't even ask those questions. We just continue to see them, and then we say, oh, there's one more CCTV camera, and then we just keep moving. The same thing applies to smart TVs as well. We buy smart TVs, we put them in our house. I've done this talks in multiple colleges. A few students raise their hands up and say that they have a smart TV at home. And I asked them, have you changed the default username and password on the smart TV? And none of them even knew that there is a username and password for their smart TV. Right? They just brought the smart TV home, connected it to their wireless network, and they said everything is up and running. But they did not know that now their smart TV is actually accessible from the internet. So there are usernames and passwords to your smart TV, and your smart TV can be targeted from the internet to do a lot of other stuff. So we'll look at a particular kind of attack that actually did this, targeted not just smart TVs but any kind of smart devices. I see a lot of smart bulbs now, and the smart bulbs that can you can connect an app to it. And then you can change the color of the light that comes up. You can control it through your app. You can even control the light when you're outside the house. Now, if you can control the light when you're outside the house, anybody else can control the light also when they're outside the house. Same thing with a smart fridge. Right? So a lot of these devices have credentials on them that we don't realize. They're default credentials, and we never take the time to go and modify them. We just buy them, keep them, and then we just keep them running. But all of those become targets. Now, all of these devices are then connected at home. They're connected to a home router. And like I said, a lot of the times the home routers also have default usernames and passwords, or they're running a very old version of the firmware that has vulnerabilities, but we never, and again, I ask this question a lot of times, have you updated the firmware on your home router? And people don't even know that the home router has firmware that can be updated. So we never do that. Right? And then from the home router, they all go up into a private or public cloud. What happens to that? What is that cloud? A cloud is just a set of computers that are sitting there and taking all of this data and storing them somewhere. How is that data secure? Is that data encrypted in the cloud? Is that data verified? Can the data be tampered with? If I go in and if I can access that cloud with a bunch of video data that's coming from the CCTV cameras on my street, can I go in and tamper them? Can I go and modify the video that's on them? Can I go, cut off some portion of the video and store it back, right? So if I do a crime and I have access to the cloud where the video is stored, then can I go to that to the cloud where the video is stored and take away just my portion of the video where the crime was committed? And would that be noticed? Would someone be able to tell that the video had been tampered with? We don't know. Right? None of us have asked those questions. We just assume that somebody's taking care of security. At this point, nobody's taking care of security. And the last step is, of course, the human being that has to interact with all of these. And there's lots and lots of ways to target human beings. So we have that. So we need security across the board. We need security in the devices, in the intermediate switches, routers, in the cloud. We need to secure the way that the human being accesses all of that data. Entire stack needs to be secure. Today, that's not the case. We don't secure the entire stack. So we are basically, there's a lot of holes everywhere. And we think that we'll just put a firewall. Our routers have home routers have a firewall. I'm just going to turn it on and now I'm secure. But if the image that's running the home router has a vulnerability, then that firewall is not going to help you. Or if you're running if you're running the router with the default username password, then that firewall is of no use at all completely. So this is the whole stack that we normally see in an IoT perspective. The whole stack needs to be completely secure. That's not there today. Security also does not necessarily mean verifiability. We look at what verifiability and trust actually means. So I want to talk about multiple types of attacks. Let's look at one. This is a very, very famous attack on IoT devices. The Mirai botnet was there, I think, maybe 5, 6. I don't remember the exact timeline, but it is a very exciting time to be in security when the Mirai botnet was happening. The Mirai botnet was very, very straightforward. What the botnet did was there's a command and control center, and the command and control would just scan the internet for IP addresses of internet of IoT devices, right? And I'll actually show you how you can do that. You can just scan the internet for IP addresses of IoT devices, and once it has done that, it had a dictionary of the common default usernames and passwords for all these kinds of devices. So you can ping the device, it'll come back. You can identify the device based on how it interacts with you. You can tell if it's an LG smart TV or a Samsung, CCTV or whatever the device type is. And then all of these devices have the default usernames and passwords. What Mirai did was it just had a dictionary of these common usernames and passwords, and then it just logs into the device with those usernames and passwords. That's it. It didn't attempt any kind of very serious attacks on them. All it did was, here's the default usernames and password. Let me just find out all these devices, just log into them. Once I've logged into them, I now change the firmware that's running on there and to infect them with the Mirai malware. What happens is that Mirai malware then went out and now became part of the botnet, right? What is a botnet? A botnet is just basically a zombie network. The devices may function as they normally do, but in addition to their normal purpose, like a smart TV or a light bulb and so on, they can also be used to target, let's say, a DDoS attack on some server. So the Mirai botnet actually did that. The Mirai could then, you could use all of these IoT devices that have become part of your botnet to go target some server, right? You can go attack a particular website. You can go attack a government installation. You can do whatever you want once you have control of all of these bots in your botnet. There is no way to get rid of Mirai. You can reboot your device, but as long as you do not change your default username and password, Mirai will just come back and reinfect you anyway. So the Mirai botnet was pretty effective. It brought down, for instance, it brought down Brian Krebs. Brian Krebs is a very well-known security consultant. It brought down his website as well. At least his website is targeted. You can imagine what a botnet of millions, even potentially 1 billion devices can do to a specific website. Here's another type of attack. This is the BGP protocol. BGP is the Border Gateway Protocol. Border Gateway Protocol is how a map of the internet is built up. So normally when we have to go, let's say I'm sitting at home, I want to go to the airport, I take out my phone, I open Google Maps, and then I say, I'm here, I want to go to this particular place, show me the map. And Google Maps then figures out where is the traffic, what is the fastest way to get there? It routes a path for me to get there. BGP does exactly the same thing for the internet. BGP is how, if you've ever wondered, I type google.com and how does my browser know how to get to google.com? BGP is the protocol that helps build that table. BGP is a protocol that builds a map of the entire internet. Okay. So from your browser, it then goes to your ISP, to ISP's to ISP, and so on, and then it crosses the submarine cables, and then goes to maybe New York or London or wherever it is, to the nearest point for the particular website that you're looking for, and all of that is done through this particular protocol. Now, as you can imagine, if I can target this protocol, I can do significant damage to how people access different servers. So let's say I want to access my HDFC Bank website, right? If I can change the BGP protocol, if I can attack the BGP protocol and the way the routes are set up, I can make all access to the HDFC website go through some other country, let's say China or Russia or something like that, right? I can make all of these routes go via a different country. I can then inspect the packets. The packets may still be completely encrypted because they're running HTTPS, but I will still be able to find out data, the metadata itself, and I can say what patterns are coming in, what's happening, what are the kinds of timelines that are being used. Or there are lots of analysis I can do on the encrypted data itself. All I have to do is I just have to change the route to say, in order to go to the HDFC Bank that's in Mumbai, I can go from Chennai, which is where I am currently, to go to, let's say, Thailand, China, Russia, and back to India, and then to Mumbai. Right? If I can definitely do that kind of hijacking. And this is not theoretical, and this is not even new. 1997, there's the AS. AS is autonomous system. That's how BGP identifies organizations. The autonomous system 7007 disrupted the internet completely in 1997. But in the 90s, the disruption was accidental. People made a mistake and they accidentally leaked a route. Leaking a route means that they claimed that their organization is the primary organization for, let's say, YouTube, right? So now if I want to go to youtube.com, I actually end up in that particular organization that leaked the route. But this was 1997. And this is 2018, 30 years now, right? Or rather, 20 years now. And 20 years, we still see the same kind of attack happening, right? And this time it's countries that intentionally redirect traffic, right? And as it says, they're not trying just to steal the information, right? They are also trying to identify patterns. So on November 15th, or so on that particular week of 2018, there was a lot of trouble accessing Google, as you can see in the subtitle there, right? If you had trouble accessing Google on that particular week, it's because another country may have hijacked your internet traffic, right? So this is an attack on the fundamental infrastructure of the internet itself. We're not talking about a single device here. We're not talking about my laptop or your webcam or anything like that. We're talking about how to fundamentally attack the infrastructure of the internet. And this happens even today. There are websites, there are trackers that constantly track how web traffic is moving through the internet, and they use this to identify if a company or a country has maliciously or accidentally rerouted the entire traffic for an organization into their own site. You can go look it up. It's very interesting watching how the internet traffic routing paths changes. Let's talk about a very critical kind of attack that's on the rise now, and this is attacks on industrial controls, control systems, and critical infrastructure. So as you can see, there are a lot of the electrical grid is actually on the internet now. They are air gap, and air gap means that there is a gap between the internet and the actual network that's running the electrical grid itself. But oftentimes that air gap can be jumped. You can jump the air gap a lot of the times through human reasons. For instance, somebody takes a USB drive and connects them from the internet and then takes the same USB drive and connects it to the internal network. Right? When they do that, they can potentially carry a malware from the internet side into the air gap side. So an example of that is the Stuxnet malware that happened a few years ago. The Stuxnet malware, I think, currently has been identified to be have been developed by Israel and the US security agencies. What the Stuxnet did was it targeted a particular kind of control system called a SCADA device, SCADA control system. The SCADA control system, and it was even there. It was even particularly targeted at the kind of SCADA devices that controls Iran's nuclear plants, the centrifuges that run the Iran's nuclear plants, nuclear program. It targeted the specific centrifuge for Iran specifically. Right? They had actually found out the serial numbers or some identification of the SCADA devices that run the Iran's nuclear program. And the Stuxnet, then what it did was it slowly sped up the centrifuge little by little, right? So the first thing it did was it turned off the connection between the monitoring system and the centrifuge itself. So the monitoring system always showed the centrifuge to be running at a certain RPM, revolutions per minute, but the centrifuge is in fact actually going slightly faster constantly. It was just increasing speed, right? The monitoring system always kept saying that the centrifuge is working perfectly, while the centrifuge actually was increasing speed, and to the point where the centrifuge could no longer sustain the speed it was running at, and it just completely fell apart. The physical centrifuge just broke down. So this is the first time that a malware actually caused a physical breakdown of a device. Right? And this, as a result, set the Iran's nuclear program back by quite a few years, actually. So this is at that time it was an experimental, and people were wondering how this happened. And one of the possibilities is that the Iran nuclear program is actually air gap. Somebody's thinking that what would have likely happened is USB drives around. Somebody picked up a USB drive that had the malware and connected to the internal network, and boom, the entire nuclear program just got busted and got sent back a few years. So you should go back and read about the Stuxnet. It's very, very interesting. How this is done, and this is in effect, this is the starting point of government's security agencies targeting critical infrastructure of other government agencies. Another kind of attack is the supply chain, but this time the software supply chain. All of us, what we do is when we need some software, what we almost always do nowadays is we just search. We search for any software that does what we want it to do. We might find it on GitHub. We might find it on some other software sites, and we just download it and use it. Even on GitHub, where the source code is available, how many of us actually read the source code for the software that we download and we use in our own software? For instance, if I need a library that does some kind of string manipulation, rather than writing it myself, that might take time. I need to do testing of it, all of this stuff. I would just go and look for some software, some library that does the string manipulation that I want. So then I would just download it maybe from GitHub, but oftentimes we never read the source code to see what it's doing. Is it contacting some server somewhere? Is it sending data from my device into some cloud somewhere? We never check any of that. We just simply download the library and use it in our software. That's a software supply chain, and the software supply chain has actually been attacked multiple times. For instance, in particular, the update infrastructure for software has been attacked quite a few times. So this was done in Ukraine, for instance. In Ukraine, the NotPetya ransomware was a very significant threat to Ukraine. It brought down a large number of companies in Ukraine. And the way that the NotPetya ransomware was transmitted was through a software called MEDoc. MEDoc is a software that is used for filing taxes in Ukraine, and pretty much every company in Ukraine uses MEDoc for filing taxes and doing whatever taxes kind of stuff that they need to do. But the update infrastructure for MEDoc was actually hacked. And whenever you download a version of MEDoc, what you were actually getting was the MEDoc software plus additional software that was targeting your machine. It was actually installing the NotPetya ransomware. And the company that was running MEDoc had not secured their update infrastructure. So when I go to the MEDoc software or any software that I run and I say, if you look at it, it'll say there's a new update for you. Do you want to download the new update? And we just go and say, yes, download the new update. It downloaded the update, but along with the update, it also downloaded the ransomware also. There are multiple websites today, in particular RPM databases for Linux systems, the Debian package management systems. They've all been attacked at some point or the other, and they've all had malware inserted in them. the Linux kernel has had malware inserted into it as well. Right? There are also backdoors in standards, and that we're not able to tell. For instance, the dual ECDR-BG standard was backdoored, and the suspicion was that it was backdoored by NSA, the security agency in the US. And we do this a lot ourselves. We actually download a lot of software without understanding what they are. We use it in our software, and as a result, we propagate the malware using our software. So IoT devices, there's a significant targets today. We all use Google to go search for something, search for whatever we want. There's a search engine specifically for searching IoT devices. That's Shodan, as you can see here, shodan.io, shodan.io. You can go to shodan.io and search for any kind of device that you want. It is free. You can also have a paid subscription where you get a lot more information. I'll show you what, for instance. So shodan.io is like the Google for IoT devices. So here's an example. I went to shodan.io, and this is the search I did. The search I did was country is India. So IN is the country code for India. I did country is India, and show me all webcams in India. And I got this. And not just this, I got a whole bunch of webcams. So as you can see on the left-hand side here, it says it found 22 webcams in India that are internet connected. And this particular webcam that's in New Delhi and is connected to the Bharti Airtel network and has this particular IP address that you can see here, is not only connected to the internet, but you can actually see what the webcam is recording at that moment in time. So I let that thought sink in for a minute. You can go to shodan.io. You can search for webcams. You can find not only webcams that are connected to the internet, but you can also see what is being seen by the webcam. Right? And all of this is available for free. We don't even think about what it is that we're putting on the internet. We're just putting a lot of things on the internet without understanding the impact of it. And on the left-hand side here, you can see the top services. 12 of those webcams are running HTTP. They're not even running HTTPS. They're not running the secure version at all. 12 of these devices are running HTTP on port 8080. That should be pretty straightforward for us to go target if you really want to target any of these devices. Right there is a way for us to go target this device. Right? So shodan.io, you can go there, you can search for all kinds of stuff. You can even have a monitor. You can set up a filter that says, every time you see a new device of this kind of something, let me know. So as you can see, there's a new service. Keep track of what you connected to the internet. You can set up a Shodan monitor, and it'll just send you a notification saying, hey, new device that you may be interested in has just been connected to the internet. There's lots of other things you can go see. You can even specify country-wise, region-wise. I'll also show you one more additional thing here. You can search for vulnerabilities using Shodan. So for instance, I searched for traffic cameras. It showed me a bunch of internet-connected traffic cameras. So I picked one. This one is in Republic of Korea, South Korea. So this traffic camera, it shows me the exact map where the traffic camera is located, right? It shows me a bunch of stuff. It shows me the IP address. I can see a bunch of raw data. It shows me what ports are open. So port 80, 443, 8880, and 60,000 are open. So it runs Apache HTTPD version 2.2.15, right? So now if I know any vulnerabilities that exist in Apache version 2.2.15, I can go and use those vulnerability to attack the device. I can also see that it's running on port 443 is running Apache HTTPD version 2.2.31 and so on. I can go through this and it'll list me all the services that are running, which ports are open, what software is servicing those ports, in this case Apache for instance. And on the left-hand side here, you can see vulnerabilities. So let me click on the vulnerabilities and it lists the vulnerabilities that that device is vulnerable to. Right? So this device may be vulnerable to this CVE, and this CVE, which are all, for instance, on the HTTP, this mod proxy, you can do a bunch of stuff. So it probably does not detect timeouts, which allows remote attackers to obtain a potentially sensitive response intended for a different client. That's a vulnerability that this device is likely open to, right? And so on. So you can basically see that Shodan not only gives you the devices, right? it tells you what vulnerabilities those devices are open to, which means that all you have to do is go through Shodan, get a bunch of devices, go to some site where there are already mechanisms to target these vulnerabilities, and all you have to do is just put them together. Take the data from Shodan, take the data, attacks that are already available freely, right? You just put them together, and now you become a malicious hacker. Right? Please don't do this, right? But you can see how easy it has become to target IoT devices. Um, as all of us who are building software, it is imperative on us to do the right thing so that we don't end up showing up in Shodan.io in this manner. So there are many, many, many more types of attacks, social engineering attack, ransomware. We haven't looked at in a lot of them. We've only looked at a few of them, but I hope that these few ones give you an example of what's possible, how easy it is to go target devices today. So securing systems is very, very hard. Not only is the software and the hardware complex, there are a lot of people interactions as well. There are lots of moving parts. Software has become extremely complicated today. But more importantly, we are also just downloading libraries from all over the place, and we're merging them all together to build software. We're not writing all of the software by ourselves anymore. Nobody writes an entire system by themselves. Either it is built by multiple people within the team, or in many, many cases, the software is actually an amalgamation of multiple open source software and proprietary software and people just putting them all together. And the end result is that nobody understands the entire software completely. Nobody understands how the system is built or the various interactions in the system. Nobody understands what happens if this particular API here takes a data that another API incorrectly sends it, right? We don't understand what happens because nobody's looking at it. Nobody's analyzing the systems that way. We just need one hole in the software, and all you get is, you get an attack. From a person who has to build the system, we have to cover every hole that is there. Every hole must be patched. But for an attacker, just one hole is sufficient for them to enter the device, enter the system, and then from there, they can cause any kind of havoc that they want. In effect, an attack is practically guaranteed. And most likely, any kind of attack is very likely to be very successful as well. So what exactly is it that we can do? Right? A lot of us think that way. The moment we think about, we need to secure this, we immediately think, let's encrypt it. We will put this big key and we'll, do RSA and we'll do, there's a lot of these fancy sounding algorithms. Let's put them all and we build this amazingly, cryptographic mechanism to secure the software. So I want you to just spend a minute reading this comic strip and then we'll continue. So what does the strip say? So here's a person who says, they're trying to attack him and they think, oh, it's 4096-bit RSA, really, really secure. You cannot hack the key, so therefore we cannot have an evil plan. But in reality, what would they do is they would just beat the guy and, he'd just take the key out of them just through what is a bad social engineering, attack in reality. Right? They don't really have to try and break your key, they just have to break the person. So all the security that we build ultimately just fall apart when you think about the human element that goes into building systems. So what is it that we can actually do? If you've seen these Hollywood movies, there are lots and lots of Hollywood movies where a bunch of people get together and then they go and try to attack a bank, right? And the one that I remember well is Ocean's 11, slightly older, right? But the goal of that movie was, I think, 11 of them, they get together and then they go to Las Vegas. There are two casinos and there's a boxing night and they need to attack the casino. And the casino has some $160 million or so. And in order to attack the casino, what they do is they have to do a whole bunch of stuff, right? They have to turn off the power grid for the entire city of Las Vegas for a certain period of time. They have to dig through this tunnel and there's a whole series of things that they have to do. in order to attack that safe and to get the $160 million. Right? And they have to, again, if you look at it, it's not an attack that I would do offhand. Right? It's not an attack that I would think of doing. Let me just walk into a casino and turn off the power and just go target the safe. That's not something that I can easily do. But the whole point of that, what I take from that movie is you have to make it really, really expensive for the attacker. They have to go to the point where they have to turn off the power for the whole city. They have to bring a building down and all kinds of stuff in order to attack you. When you do that, what you do is you reduce the number of people who will try to attack you. Right? The more and more expensive it becomes for an attacker to target you, the less and less the number of people who are going to try and target you. If somebody is really interested in targeting you because of the kind of information that you carry, for instance, if you have $160 million in the safe, I don't have a problem spending $20 or $30 million to attack you. Because the return on investment is pretty significant. I spent $20 million, I get back $160 million. That's a very significant return on investment for me. So as a result, I would actually spend the $20 million to target you, and for $20 million, I can do all kinds of stuff. But if I have to spend $150 million and I would get back $160 million, that's not an attack that's worthwhile for me to do. So that is how we need to start thinking about the systems that we build, is how expensive is it for the attacker to target us. If we make it really, really simple, then anybody walking off the street is going to try and target us. And this is where the difference in depth comes in. We need to layer the kinds of security that we build. So again, if you think back to the kind of Hollywood movies that do this, they have layers and layers of security, right? We have to enter the casino, there's cameras all over the casino. You need to go and target specific cameras. You need to go to the IT room where they store all these servers. You need to do all kinds of stuff. Layer by layer, they have to break through every kind of security that's been set up for them. Right? And all of these security makes sure that no random person is walking on the street can target them. It takes a lot of effort to target, and that's what we need to do. For instance, here's a safe. This is an actual safe from the early 1900s, 1905 or so, I think it is. This is a very good safe for the year 1905, right? But this is not a safe that I would use today. This would be a really, really easy target for anybody. So I would definitely not want to store, for instance, my DNS keys. DNSSEC keys is not something that I would store in this safe. The one on the right-hand side, on the other hand, is a real safe that's being used in banks in Europe. That is the kind of safe that you would see in Hollywood movies. That's the kind of safe that I would likely store my DNSSEC keys. So this is the kind of the safe on the right is the kind of safe that would take many millions to break into, and I have to build elaborate plans to do this. So that's our goal. Our goal is basically to make it expensive for attackers to attack us. Right? That's the first step. I want to talk about the second step now, which is trust. We talked about security. We talked about how to secure systems. What is trust? Security and trust are not the same thing. For instance, security is the goal, right? It's the perfect end state. It's a paradise. We really want to have perfect security, but that's not possible. We know that's not possible because there's just too many different elements around for us to try and achieve security, including the human element. The human element is almost always the weak link in all of this. We can try to get very close, but we cannot be 100% secure. But what we can try to do is we can try to build trust. Building trust is, again, something that we as humans do all the time. For instance, if you have a network of friends, you always say, in that network of friends, you would always say, I trust, here's Vivek, and a bunch of people, right? But I would trust Vivek to this level. I would trust a lot of stuff to Vivek. I would trust my significant secrets. I would tell Vivek, right? But I would not tell Rahul a bunch of stuff, right? For instance, Rahul, I would only trust. I may give Rahul my bike keys, but I would not give him my car keys because I know that he cannot handle my car, right? But I know he can handle my bike. I would trust him with my bike, but not my car. Vivek, on the other hand, I would give him everything. And this is something that we all know how to do. we all have built a network of friends, and within the network of friends, we measure the trust factor for each of them. We clearly say what we would and we would not do with each of our friends' circle. Right? And then we use the friend circle to build subsequent networks of friends. So that's what LinkedIn is all about. Right? When you go to LinkedIn, you have you have a bunch of people that you work with, that you know and you trust, and then you use that network to build subsequent circles of trust. So that's why LinkedIn says your first relationship, second relationship, and so on. You have these circles of trust, and then we build these circles of trust based on that. So as humans, we know how to do this. What we want to do is bring that same knowledge into systems as well. We want to bring the idea of trust into systems. Here, let me give you an example. So this is a typical, manufacturing facility. On the left-hand side builds something, right? And then it sends it to the transport system. So let's say somebody builds something and puts it up on Amazon. You buy the product on Amazon. Amazon ships it and then sends it to your house or to your office or to wherever, and then you start using this. So here, you have to have trust in the person manufacturing it. You need to have trust in the person who's shipping it, and then you have the product itself. So you trust the manufacturer, right? And this is you. You trust yourself, hopefully, right? And then what you care about is the trust in these two sides. What you cannot trust is the transit. You don't know what happens in transit. I want to give you an example. This are photos that showed up in the year 2013. There was a whistleblower from the US security agency called the NSA, right? And the whistleblower, Edward Snowden, published a bunch of PPTs and photos that clearly showed that the US security agencies were specifically targeting companies that were shipping devices. They were intercepting these packages, they were opening them up, and then they would install malicious firmware or malicious hardware, repackage them, and send it back to the original customer. Right? And the customer did not know that the device that they received has a malicious firmware or malicious hardware in them. The manufacturer also did not know that a security agency was intercepting these packets, these devices, and inserting firmware. Now, as a customer, when I hear of something like this, I would immediately think that the manufacturer is also problematic. I would think that the manufacturer is intentionally also working along with the security agency to hack me, right? But that's not the case. The manufacturer did not know that this was happening. So it is a responsibility of the manufacturer to build trust for the customer. We don't want to trust in the transit at all. We really care about the manufacturer, what the manufacturer did. So all of us need to be asking two questions from all of the devices, the hardware that we buy, the software that we use. We need to be asking two questions. One is, how do I know that my device is running the software that I think it is running? I think it's running Windows 10 version so and so. I'm running PowerPoint and I'm running Adobe Reader and so on. Is my software actually running what I think it's running? Or has it been hacked? How do I know that? Right? And the second thing I don't know is, the question that I need to ask is, has my device been physically altered since it was built? Right? So if I keep my device in my office at my desk, and then I go out for a coffee and I come back, has my device been physically altered? If I work in an airport, for instance, I keep my computer on the table, I go get a cup of coffee, when I come back, has my device been physically altered? Did somebody log into my device and do something to my software? Or did they change the hardware in some way? Did they insert a USB disk that caused something to happen? How do I know that? As common users, we may not think that this is important for us, but for an enterprise customer, especially large enterprises, government agencies, these are very, very critical questions to be answered. And if each of us are building products that we expect the enterprises or the government agencies to run, we should be able to answer these questions as well. We should be able to tell an enterprise or a government agency that the software has not been altered, the hardware has not been altered, you're running trustworthy software and trustworthy hardware. That's extremely critical. We do not think in these terms today, but we need to really think in these terms. So for instance, I want to talk about Linux. Right? Linux kernel is the one that starts applications. And so every time an application starts, Linux starts it, we implicitly trust the Linux kernel. We download Ubuntu or Red Hat and we run it, and we have no idea if somebody modified it somewhere, right? We just implicitly trust the Linux kernel. Why would we trust the Linux kernel? We should not be trusting the Linux kernel. It could be modified in some way that we don't know. So what we really want is for the grub bootloader to verify the Linux kernel. So the Linux kernel must be verified by grub, and the grub must say that I can tell you that the Linux kernel has not been modified since the kernel was built by Linus Torvalds himself, or by Canonical, who built Ubuntu, or by Red Hat, who built Fedora, and so on. I should be able to, the grub bootloader should be able to tell that the Linux kernel is pristine, right? It has not been hacked in any way. But here we have a problem. Grub bootloader is also software. Somebody wrote the code. How do you trust grub? Right? That's where we have the BIOS. BIOS will verify grub. But now you can see where this is going. Who trusts the BIOS? Maybe the Intel processor must trust the BIOS. But then how do you trust Intel? And so now we have a chain of trust. We need to be able to trust the most fundamental layer in our system. And then that layer can then go out and trust everything else there. And then we build a chain of trust. So this is exactly like LinkedIn, where we say that we have a network of the first small circle, and then the BIOS forms a second circle, the grub forms a third circle, and the Linux kernel forms a fourth circle, and hence we form a chain of trust. But can we really trust the processor? And actually, what we do in industry today is something called a trust anchor, a root of trust. As you can see from the terminology, the root of trust is really the root of all the trust that we have in the system. Right? The root of trust must be something that is very, very small, that we can all read the source code and we can all say, yes, this source code has not been modified. It is completely signed and verified. And as a result, we trust the software that is the root of trust. Right? It could be a small chip that's running on the hardware. That small chip would basically, the firmware is open source, all of us should be able to read it, and it should be so small, the firmware should be so small that we can all implicitly read it and understand it and say, yes, nothing has been modified. For instance, all that the root of trust firmware does is that it verifies that the Intel processor, the firmware inside the Intel processor is fine. Right? That's all it must do. Once the root of trust verifies that the Intel is fine, then now we can trust the Intel, the processor itself. And then the processor can then verify the BIOS, right? And then the BIOS can verify grub can verify kernel, and we know that this whole series has not been tampered in any way. In reality, what happens is that the trust anchor actually verifies the BIOS, not the Intel processor. The trust anchor verifies the BIOS verifies grub verifies kernel, the kernel launches applications, and thus we form the chain of trust. Now, the same thing happens on your Windows machines as well. When you do secure boot on your Windows machines, or you do, when if you have a Mac does secure boot as well. Mac OS is also runs secure boot. This is exactly what happens when you secure boot a device. The whole process is called secure boot. You have a very small chip, easily verifiable chip. And that chip is something that you would trust. That's your LinkedIn-like first circle that you would implicitly trust. And then subsequently, you build these second and third and fourth layers of trust, fourth circles of trust. And that's how you build the chain of trust. If you were to take the analogy to your friends, the root of trust is Vivek, with whom you would trust everything. And then you would ask Vivek saying, hey, can I trust Rahul with my car keys? And Vivek would say, yes, of course you can trust Rahul with your car keys. So Vivek is your root of trust. And you would go ask Vivek for everything in the world. And whatever Vivek says, you would implicitly trust that. That's so Vivek forms your trust anchor. And then from there, you would trust everybody else. So from Vivek, you would trust Rahul. From Rahul, you would trust anybody else. And so on. You form the chain of trust. So we talked about this. There are lots of examples. You're welcome to go look up, like Google Titan runs on all of your Pixel phones. Microsoft has Cerberus. Apple has T2. T2 runs on both your laptops as well as your iPhones and iPads and so on. So all of your devices today have a root of trust, and that's how we build the chain of trust in all the devices that we use. So once you have a chain of trust, now would you trust the device to tell you that it's trusted? In the sense that if I go to Rahul and say, hey, Rahul, can I give you my car keys? And, would you promise me that you would not break it? And Rahul is, of course, going to say, yes, I will. I will do nothing damaging to your car, right? But that's not how you would work. Because the way you would normally work is you would ask Vivek about Rahul. You would not ask Rahul about Rahul, because asking Rahul about Rahul is exactly like this guy here. He would just say, "Of course you can trust me, right? I would do nothing damaging to your car." He's always going to say everything is fine, right? But what you want is something called integrity visibility. Integrity visibility is just like asking, it's just like LinkedIn. I want to see the chain of trust. I want to see the chain of trust in my software system, hardware system, and the entire thing put together. So there is an organization that does this. It's called Trusted Computing Group. The Trusted Computing Group works on building trustworthy systems. They tell you how to build these chains of trust. For instance, on all devices that have secure boot enabled, you have these hashes in the TPM. And what these hashes indicate is that they are the hashes for each of the layers of software that you're running. So PCR number 0, the register, these PCRs are registers. The register number 0 contains a hash of the BIOS. Register number 1 is BIOS configuration, and so on, going up to register number 8 to 15 are the operating system registers. So if I can take these hash, I can compare them to the manufacturer's hash. I would then know if my device is running exactly the software, the firmware, or anything else that the manufacturer sent to me. I can verify this against the manufacturer's website and say, yes, I am running exactly the software, the firmware, and the hardware that the manufacturer shipped to me. This is what the TCG does. Once again, this is a Trusted Computing Group. And the chip itself is called Trusted Platform Module, TPM, Trusted Platform Module. Practically all devices, laptops, any desktops, phones, tablets, they all carry a TPM. If you're building any kind of IoT devices, I strongly, very strongly recommend adding a TPM chip to your device. I very strongly recommend going through the Trusted Computing Group's Trusted Platform Module 2.0 specification. I strongly recommend that you build the trustworthy systems into your IoT devices. Every IoT device, every device that ships must carry a TPM device, TPM chip in them, and then we can build these chains of trust, layers of trust. We should be able to verify that a device is running exactly the software, the firmware, and the hardware that we ship. We don't want somebody tampering these devices. For instance, if I have a light bulb, a smart light bulb, I should be able to go ask the smart light bulb saying, give me your BIOS hash, give me your firmware hash. It should give me the hash. And using that hash, I should be able to verify against the manufacturer's website. And I should be able to tell that my light bulb has not been attacked by the Mirai botnet. My light bulb is not part of the Mirai botnet. And I should be able to do that by using the TPM chip on all of my devices. So this is something I think as part of the Thingqbator, as part of any other IoT projects that you're building, you should be building it with the TPM chip in them. It's a little bit more expensive, but not much. The TPM devices are built, are mass manufactured today. There are many, many companies that ship the TPM chip. You should definitely look at integrating the TPM chip. You definitely look at integrating the hashes, and it's called an attestation. You should be attesting your software is just like a public notary. Whenever you go to the government, they tell you get it notarized by a public notary. You go pay 100 rupees or something, and the notary will sign it and say, I verified the license number, I verified all the stuff, and they put a chapa on it, and they sign in green ink, and they give it back to you. That's exactly what the TPM chip is. The TPM chip is like a notary. All of your IoT devices must carry a TPM chip, must do this kind of hashing, and that way you can trust the devices that are shipped. Search for it, a practical guide to TPM 2.0. It's a 600-page book, very, very useful. And this is how this tells you what the APIs are, what the TPM chip APIs are. The TPM APIs are standard. You could go buy a TPM chip from any vendor, and the same APIs will apply. So you can get this book. It's free. It is imperative. It is necessary for all of us to follow these mechanisms so that we can build trustworthy systems. We can build systems that people can trust. If we don't build systems that people can trust, then we will reach a point where nobody will buy our products. Right? When somebody buys a phone, they will not know if the phone is something. The phone has been hacked. Is somebody looking at the messages? Is somebody attacking WhatsApp? We won't know any of that. I think it's important for all of us to look at this. So that's one kind of trust. This is the IoT level trust, and how to build a TPM chip into it. But there's a second kind of trust that all of us work with every day, and that's the green locks that you see in all websites. Whenever you go to a website, you see a green lock, and then you say, "Oh, that's good. This site must be secure." And we all implicitly assume that we've been in the last few years, especially the last 4 or 5 years, it's been drilled into all of our heads that a green lock means secure, means safety. Unfortunately, none of us understand what the green lock really means. We just look at the green lock and say, "Oh, there's a green lock on this website. There is a lock, and the green is now changed colors. I see Firefox is now moved away from green. It's a gray lock, I think, or maybe changes colors with the themes that you add." But it's a lock today. And a lot of us look at the lock and say, this site must be secure because it has a lock. So all the training that we've had the last few years to look for the lock has changed our perception of what we're looking at. I want to address this specifically because this is a significant source of trust that we all believe in. And it's important that we understand what the green lock means and what it means cryptographically speaking. So what does a green lock really mean? When I look at the site google.com, right, and I see a lock on it, it really means that that site is google.com, right? How do we prove that this site is google.com? There are ways to prove that the site is google.com, and we can do it based on the lock itself. And we'll take a look at how we can do that, right? But what does it not mean? It does not mean that the site is legitimate or valid. And I'm not talking about Google specifically. Google is, of course, legitimate and a valid site. But let's say that you go to a website that somebody just sent you a link, and you click on the link, it takes you to some website. Now, how do you know if that website is trustworthy or not? There's no way to tell today. What we do is we look at the lock on the website, and we all say, hey, the website has a lock, therefore it must be safe and secure. So only one of those adjectives can be applied to a website that has a lock, and that is secure. And what that really means is that your communication with that website is encrypted. It does not mean that that website is safe. Okay? We still require that we check the validity of the site manually. For instance, on the bottom of the slide here, you can see there are three websites for HDFC Bank. Right? Now, which of these is the real website for HDFC Bank? So the real website is hdfcbank.com, right? But there's also hdfc.com, hdfcbank.in, and we think to ourselves, hey, HDFC is an Indian bank. Maybe hdfcbank.in is the right website, right? Or there can be any combination of these. Right? For instance, the State Bank of India is not sbi.com, right? It's online sbi.com. Now, that's something that I would never have guessed by myself, that the State Bank of India's website is online sbi.com. So let's say I get a link in WhatsApp or in some mail, and it points me to sbibank.com. Right? Sent me a link to sbibank.com. I click on the link, and it takes me to the website sbibank.com. There is a lock on that, and the website looks exactly like State Bank of India's website. Right? There's the logo of SBI. It has a login. It has a password. It has all kinds of stuff on it. Now I'm going to implicitly assume that the website says sbibank.com. There is a lock on the website, right? Therefore, this website must be the website for State Bank of India. But I would be wrong, right? I'm not wrong in thinking that this is State Bank of India's website because I have no way to verify that. We've been trained to look at the lock, but what we don't realize is that nowadays every website has a lock. What does a lock really mean? We'll take a look at that shortly. But just as a reminder, just because there is a lock on a website does not mean that the website is a legitimate website. For instance, there is goggle.com, right? Goggle.com. This is a typo, right? Instead of typing GOOGLE.com, I typed GOGGLE.com, right? This website has a green lock on it. It's not Google. It has a green lock on it. Right? And if I accidentally type this, or if I got a link and I didn't look at it carefully, then I would just click on this link. It would take me to this website, and there I could ask for your Google ID, your password, and it has a lock on it, and I would just trust it. But it's not Google. And actually, I can go to internetbadguys.com, and they also have a green lock. Here's Goggle.com. This actually is Goggle.com. When you go to Goggle.com, it actually redirects you to a bunch of websites. For instance, immediately it redirects me to top5bestmealdelivery.com. Right? And it redirected me to top5bestmealdelivery.com at the time that I went to Goggle.com. If I went to Goggle.com today, it will show me a different website. Every few minutes, Goggle.com actually redirects to completely different websites. Okay, so I went to Goggle.com. I assumed it was Google.com. I made a mistake. I typed Goggle.com. If you look at this website, top5bestmealdelivery.com, has a secure connection. It has a green lock on it, completely secure. Right? Is this a legitimate website? Can I give my credit card information to this website? Can I give my Google ID and password into this website? Of course not. Right? But I don't know that when I just look at the green lock here. I don't know the reputation of a website when I look at the website. So I'm going to do two things. Number one, most important, I'll tell you how to look up the reputation of websites. And number two, we're going to talk about how the green lock is actually built. So internet reputation, I strongly recommend using talosintelligence.com, Reputation Center. So if you go to this website and you give it the website the domain name, it will come back and tell you the reputation for the particular site. So when I went to Google.com and I gave it, it basically told me that the content category is advertisements, right? Web reputation on the right-hand side top here, it says web reputation is untrusted, poor, threat category, malware sites. So the talosintelligence.com/reputation center, I gave it Google.com. So again, it has a window, a space to enter your domain. You enter the domain and it gives you this as the output. As you can see, for Google.com, it says it's an untrusted website, poor reputation, it is a malware site. Right? And the content category is advertisements. This is a website that I strongly recommend you send it out to everybody in your network, especially to your parents and to other senior citizens who do not understand how the internet works, right? Or who are just constantly getting these spam messages on WhatsApp and they don't know what it is. So they just go click on it and then they go to some website and they don't know what to do. Right? I strongly recommend sending this link to all of your, to everybody in a network. Everybody must use this to determine the reputation before they click on links. It's very, very important. So let's look at what the green lock actually means. First, we're going to look at some aspects of cryptography. So there are keys and key pairs. The symmetric keys. Symmetric keys are when I have a key, you have the key, and the keys are the same. Typically, this is used in, for instance, your Wi-Fi password. Right? Your router's Wi-Fi SSID, you connect to an SSID, you need to give a password. That's a symmetric key because everybody has to give the same key, and that's the same key that's programmed into the router as well. Then there are asymmetric keys where you have a key pair, a public key and a private key. The private key must be kept secure, that's your key, and the public key will be exposed to others. We will take a look at the subsequent sites about how the private key and public key are used. Right? And the key size determines the strength of the cryptography. Normally we talk about key size in terms of bits. We would say 1024 bits, 2048 bits, and so on. We talk about, that's how the key sizes are determined. So let's look at how these keys are actually used. We will look specifically for asymmetric cryptography because that's how most of the internet runs. So Alice and Bob are two people in pretty much all of cryptography. We like Alice and Bob. We always use Alice and Bob as examples. So what we do here, what Alice does is Alice wants to have some confidential communication with Bob, right? So let's say that she and Bob want to have communications that nobody else must interfere in. So Alice creates a key pair. Alice creates a key pair, and Alice sends the public key to Bob. The public key, not the private key. Okay, and Alice keeps the private key to herself and sends the public key to Bob. And not just to Bob, Alice can send the public key to the entire world. You can publish the public key on your website as a signature in your email. in your WhatsApp status messages, wherever you want, you can publish the public key. It's meant to be public. Now, anybody, including Bob, when they want to send confidential communication to Alice, what they would do is they would take the data, they would encrypt the data with the public key, and they would send the encrypted data to Alice. Alice would then use the private key to decrypt the data. And since only Alice has the private key, only Alice can decrypt the data. Nobody else will be able to decrypt the data. Only Alice will be able to decrypt the data. Right? So this is the first part about confidential communication: is you need to create a key pair, publish the public key to the entire world, let everybody encrypt the data with the public key, your public key, and then they would send it to you, and only you can decrypt the public key. Right? So that's the first part that allows us to do confidential communication. Right? You have encryption and decryption to do confidential communication. Now, since only Alice has the private key, nobody else will be able to decrypt that data that Bob is sending to Alice. Not just Bob, anybody who sends it to Alice. The second part is sign and verify. In sign and verify, what we do is Alice creates a key pair, and again, Alice publishes the key pair to the entire world. Right? The purpose of the sign and verify is for Alice to prove to the world that it was Alice who sent out a message. So what Alice would do is she would take any data that she wants, and she would sign the data with her private key. Right? She would sign the data with her private key. She would send this data and the signature out to the entire world, not just to Bob, to the entire world. Right? And now Bob and the entire world can verify that it is Alice who sent that message, because they can verify that the signature matches with Alice's public key. Right? They can use Alice's public key to verify that Alice is the one who signed it, because only Alice has the private key. Now you can see how the encryption, decryption, and sign and verify can be put together. So let's go back. Bob sends a message to Alice, and Alice needs to respond to the message. So when Alice responds to the message, she will sign it, and that way Bob knows that Alice received the message, and Alice is the one who's sending a response back. He can verify, Bob can verify that Alice is the one who responded to the particular message. So asymmetric cryptography is used for two different purposes. One is the encryption decryption for confidential communication, and sign and verify is to do non-repudiation, in the sense that if at some point Alice comes back and says, I'm not the one who wrote that message, you can use the signature and the public key to show Alice that it was in fact her who had sent that message. So sign and verify and encrypt and decrypt. So now we have public keys. Alice has published her public keys, but if you look at a public key, they're just a series of numbers, right? And everybody can publish that public key, right? But how do you look at a public key and know whose public key is it? What is missing in this picture is the identity of the owner of the public key. So if I go to my WhatsApp message and I publish my public key, how do people know that is in fact it is my public key and not somebody else's public key that got published, right? Another thing that people can do is they can impersonate Alice. So let's go back here. They can impersonate Alice, and they can put out a public key saying, hey, this is Alice's public key, right? When in fact, Alice is not the one who created the key pair, and Alice is not the one who published that particular public key, which means that somebody is impersonating Alice. And now what would happen is if anybody wants to send confidential communication to Alice, they would in fact be sending data that is encrypted with somebody else's key. So it's a man-in-the-middle attack. It's called a man-in-the-middle attack. So what would happen is people are, they are behaving as if they're Alice, and they are publishing keys. So when you look at a public key, it's just a series of numbers. There is no way to tell who owns the public key, which is where a very important aspect of our current communication comes in, which are certificates. So these are called X509 certificates. X509 is the standard. You can go look it up. They are a standard that define public key certificates. Okay. The certificate contains the public key, which is the most important part. But in addition to that, it also contains the identity of the owner of the key. Right? The certificate contains the identity of the owner of the key. The identity can be of many different forms. For instance, it can be an email address. If you want to use a certificate for signing your email messages, the identity would be the email address. If you want the identity to be in a website, then it would be for instance, if you're making a confidential communication with google.com, right? Then the identity in that certificate would be www.google.com, right? So the certificate would contain Google's public key. It would have the Google's website, www.google.com, and that's how that ties the identity and the public key. But most importantly, the certificate must be signed by a certificate authority. The certificate authority is again like a public notary. It's like a notary public, right? So somebody who you would trust should sign the certificate and say that this public key is tied to this identity. For instance, this public key belongs to Alice, this public key belongs to google.com, this public key belongs to yahoo.com, and so on. If you want to have a private communication, you can even self-sign. This is like the government asking us to self-notarize our Aadhaar card. Right? When we go submit some documentation, the government has changed from public notary to self-notary. We just sign our own copy of Aadhaar card. So that's a self-sign for private users only. Right? The key part about certificates is that you can blacklist certificates, which means that if some website starts to behave in a malicious manner, starts to attack people, then you can blacklist that particular website. And certificates are how pretty much all protocols are today, encryption, decryption, all protocols are run using certificates. It's not enough for you to just have a public key to do the encryption, decryption, because you do not know whose identity is tied to the public key. So instead, you use a certificate, and the certificate must be signed by a certificate authority. So today, SSH, for instance, smart cards, when you go into an office and you take out an ID card and you scan that ID card, or there are in many European countries, they do banking transactions and elections through a smart card that everybody owns. All of those use X509 certificates. IPsec, your Wi-Fi authentication, it doesn't have to be password-based. You can actually do certificate-based authentication. We don't do it today, but certificate-based authentication are much more secure than password-based authentication. So you have that. And of course, all of our HTTPS communication are all driven by certificates. Right? Any TLS communication is all driven by certificates. So this is what a X509 certificate looks like. There's a version number, a serial number. Serial number is globally unique. The signature algorithm. So what algorithm did you use for signing? Issuer name. Issuer name is a certificate authority. That's the notary, equivalent to the public notary, who issued the certificate. Right? And there's a validity period, again. So the certificate is not valid before a certain date, not valid after a certain date. The subject name is all the identity. Subject name, subject public key, all of these form the identity of the entity that owns the public key. So this is how you tie the google.com website to Google's public key, and it is signed by somebody that you trust. So who would you trust? So who do you trust are certificate authorities? None of us know who certificate authorities are. We don't see them, but they are organizations that have the power to issue and revoke certificates. Revocation is the process of adding a certificate into a blacklist. There are a set of requirements that they follow, and the requirements are put together by the certificate authority and our browsers. So Chrome, Firefox, Google basically for Chrome, Mozilla for Firefox, Apple, Microsoft, they all have combined together and they've come up with a set of requirements for the certificate authorities to follow. Right? And the certificate authority will verify the organization who wants a certificate by using traditional methods. You can use, for instance, a DNS entry for domain names and so on. So there's a certificate signing process. An organization that wants to get a certificate will send a certificate signing request to the certificate authority. Certificate authority would then ask for identity verification. For instance, if you own an email address, then you need to respond to an email. If you want a personal identity, then you would go show like an Aadhaar card or something to get your own personal identity certificate. Or you would show your DNS records for domain verification. And the certificate authority would then create and sign a certificate and send it back to you. During this process, the organization must prove that they have the private key part of the public key, right? So they have to prove that, and they prove it by signing a message with their private key. So here's an example of a certificate. This is Google's certificate. If you go to google.com, you will see this particular certificate. So the subject name, this is the identity of the organization that owns the certificate. So the star.google.com, so it can be any website, mail.google.com, or advertisement.google.com, tracking.google.com, whatever, right? All of them would have the same certificate, right? That's the identity. They are in the US, they are in the state of California, in the city of Mountain View, and so on. Then the certificate itself is issued by Google Trust Services, and it tells you that it's a signature algorithm, is a SHA-256 with RSA encryption. It gives you the serial number for the particular certificate. It tells you also that it is not valid before 6th September 2019, not valid after 29th November 2019. It's almost a 3-month certificate. And then it tells you the public key information. It gives you the public key and the algorithm for the public key. Elliptic curve cryptography is used here. And it tells you also what you can use the keys for. In this case, you can use the keys for signing, right? You can use the keys for doing server authentication, which means that this particular key can be used to host a web server. There's a certificate hierarchy, as we saw. A root certificate is the root to the entire internet. Root certificates are held by the certificate authority. We implicitly trust them. They're self-signed. Then there are intermediate certificates and end-entity certificates. I won't go too much into them, but let's just say you can create any level of hierarchy that you want, but typically a 3-level hierarchy is followed. Right? So when you go to Google, it shows you the certificate hierarchy. Google.com is signed by Google Trust Services. Google Trust Services is signed by Global Sign. Global Sign is a certificate authority, and it has the power to issue certificates to anybody in the world. So how do you trust all of these certificate authorities? You can go look up in each of your browsers, you can go look up the certificate authority and the root programs, and you can go take a look at it. It will give you more information on this. There's a problem with the certificate authority. None of us know these certificate authorities, like Global Sign, for instance, right? Or VeriSign. We don't know who these certificate authorities are. We implicitly trust them. We expect the browsers to do the right thing. We expect that Google Chrome will do the right thing when it has to verify the certificates. The certificate authorities can be controlled by governments, and as a result, the governments can force the certificate authorities to issue certificates to bad websites. That's a significant problem, and I'll show you a few examples of where that has happened. They're called root certificate attacks. For instance, I can install a root certificate, a self-signed certificate, and the result of installing the self-signed certificate is that I can sign any website as google.com, right? And I would now have access to your entire data that you would send to google.com. Here's a few examples. On Mac OS, a malware, what it did was it modified your Mac OS's trust store to add a malicious certificate. The result of adding the malicious certificate is that any website you go to would become automatically trusted, and the malware now has access to, has the ability to decrypt and re-encrypt any data that you send to google.com or yahoo.com or anywhere else. Here's another example. Government of Kazakhstan, for instance, has a certificate authority called Quasnet, a certificate. And government of Kazakhstan basically told all of its citizens that they must install this root certificate. And the reason they did that is because the moment you install a government-based root certificate or any kind of malicious root certificate, any traffic that you send to google.com, yahoo.com, or any website can be decrypted by the government of Kazakhstan and then re-encrypted as well. The government of Kazakhstan will now have access to all the data that you send to anybody in the world. A lot of us run free VPN servers. Be very, very careful when you install a free VPN server, especially on your phones or your laptop. We use a VPN server because we want to bypass the geolocation checks. We want to go access, some video site in the US or in Europe. But the free VPN servers, the reason they're free is because they install root certificates, which allow them to decrypt all the traffic. For instance, you think that instead of going to google.com this way, you're going to VPN services this way. What actually happens is that the free VPN servers, they install a root certificate, as a result of which all the traffic that you send to anybody in the world can be decrypted by the VPN server. So they're not just doing a pass-through, They are actually decrypting the traffic. They are looking into the traffic, so they can then look at what your Google password is. They can look at any password for any of your accounts, and then they re-encrypt it, and then they send it back to the actual website. They're doing a man-in-the-middle attack. That's not what they were supposed to do. That's not what you are expecting them to do. But most of the free VPN servers actually do a man-in-the-middle attack. Be very careful when you pick a free VPN server. In some cases, like in this case, there's a company called Dark Matter. Dark Matter, by its very name, they sound like a Bond or a Marvel comic supervillain. But Dark Matter is a company that works out of the United Arab Emirates. They wanted to become a certificate authority. And they went to ask all the browsers to automatically trust any certificates issued by Dark Matter. But it turns out that Dark Matter ran a project called Project Raven, in which they were spying on the citizens of the United Arab Emirates. They were actually creating malware and so on. So in this case, Mozilla and other browser vendors, they refused to trust Dark Matter certificate. So Dark Matter certificate was blacklisted. And as a result, Dark Matter could not issue any certificates to anybody. So certificate programs are very, very key. We actually trust our browsers significantly to do these kinds of verification. If the browser vendors decide to do something bad, then we have no way to identify that. Most of the time, they're doing the right thing, and the certificate authorities are most of the time doing the right thing. But it's something that we just implicitly trust. I have a bunch of scripts and tutorials that you can use to do a hands-on work. Here's the website, github.com, Kaarthik S CyberSec. You're welcome to go fork this, fork my repo. Please play with it. I teach you, how to use OpenSSL to generate these asymmetric keys, public-private key pair for RSA, ECC, all of that. I teach you how to do run a certificate authority on your own, how to get certificates signed. You can definitely go there. Please, go to the website, clone my repo, play with it. There are tutorials there that you can use to do all of this work. I hope it's very useful. You'll get some very good hands-on experience with generating keys, with building certificates, learning about certificate authorities. I also give an example of how to create your own certificate authority, sign your own certificate, install it into the Nginx web server, Nginx. Nginx is like Apache. It's a web server that you can run on any of your devices. So I teach you how to get a certificate and then install it on your Nginx web server. And when you then go to your local host, you will be able to see the green lock in your own website, right? So I teach you how to do all of that stuff. Please go to this, clone the repo. If you have any questions, please, you can communicate through this. If you have any modifications that you would like to see done, you're welcome to send me a pull request. I'm happy to take pull requests from anybody. Send me modifications. Hope this is very useful. Right? So I want to summarize.
Thanks a lot, Kaarthik. If you can just go to the chat. I think someone has posted some questions, and while you continue to end this, I request all the participants, if you have any questions, now would be a good time probably to put them down in the chat, and then Kaarthik will look at it and answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say a few things, right? In summary, internet is very fragile. Please learn how it works. It's very, very important that we understand how this works. And the second thing I would say is securing a system is very hard. We looked at it. So please start using trustworthy systems. Start using a TPN. It's very important. Build auditable systems. We need to know when we are getting hacked. It's very important. Establish trust. Okay. Let me go take a look at that. Okay. So I see a question. I would like to know the impact of the attacks, especially the ones like BGP hijacking. The network is a software-defined network. I suspect all the major. So the fact that the network is a SDN or not does not change the impact. Right? All that the SDN is doing is that it is instead of running a physical device with a routing protocol, you're probably running a controller in the cloud that is doing the routing protocol for you, and then pushing that forwarding information into the devices. Right? But the SDN controller must still communicate with the routing peers, right? It still has to use BGP. It still has to do all of that stuff. It's just that your protocol is probably not situated in the same hardware that's doing the forwarding. But the BGP attack is a control plane attack. It's not a data plane attack. It's a control plane attack. You're inserting malicious routes into the BGP protocol, and thereby you're changing the map of the entire internet, the control plane view of the entire internet. So that doesn't really, I don't see if that is how the SDN network would really mitigate that particular attack. I think that the BGP protocol running in the SDN controller would still be vulnerable to such an attack. Okay, the first question was, is it true that our privacy is a myth? Um, Most likely, right? We ourselves voluntarily hand over information to many companies, to everywhere. We're very happy to post on Facebook, all kinds of status. Right? We give away our phone numbers to Facebook for as part of the multi-factor authentication, and Facebook then just turns around and uses those phone numbers to link our identity with other users that have our phone number, not other users, but other companies that have our phone number, and just build a massive network of information about us. Right? It's you're fighting a big battle with privacy for sure, right? But I think the question really is, how much would you compromise your privacy for? What would you compromise your privacy for? For instance, the Arogya Setu app that just came out, right? Would you be willing to compromise your privacy for your health, right? Or Facebook, would you be willing to compromise your privacy for the sake of connecting with friends and all of that, right? And we're all looking at privacy as a compromise. But here's a thing that a lot of us don't think about. Before the internet, when we used to have just normal phone lines, there used to be telephone books, right? We would all have telephone books at home. You would open the telephone book, and you can search by name, right? Alphabetically, there would be all of our names in there. Again, I mean, maybe I'm just showing my age by pointing at telephone books, right? If you're very young, you've probably never seen a telephone directory before, right? But the telephone directory, it's an actual physical book that you get home, and you can search by name for the phone numbers of people. Is that a violation of privacy? Everybody in the entire city had your name linked to your phone number. Right? Was that a violation of our privacy? So really, that was a service that used to happen automatically. Right? So that's the question. Or we could call BSNL, right, or whatever the government lines that were there 30 years ago. You could call them and you could ask them the directory for the phone number of anybody, and they will give it to you. So that's the key. Really, privacy is about what is being done with our data and what are we willing to give up that data for. That's what our privacy is like. It's completely up to you. If you say, I don't want to use Facebook, Facebook still knows about it because they track through other means. How to prevent vulnerabilities like OpenPort on Shodan or NSS website? There are lots of tools, right? For instance, Nmap is a very straightforward tool. If you run a server, you can run Nmap on your server, and it will tell you what ports are open, right? It will tell you that you have HTTP open, you have a bunch of stuff. It will even give you the vulnerabilities. You can even point Shodan at your server, right? You can ask Shodan to find the vulnerabilities in your server, and it will do that. Yes, you can give it an IP address, it will do a scan, and it will tell you. There are many such services. They're called penetration testing, pen testing. Every time you put up a service, you put up a software system, you build a system, you are expected to run a pen test on your device, on your system, on your server, right? And a pen test will point out all this information. Why it's very hard to secure? I think we looked at that, right? And we take software from all over the place and we just integrate them. Many of us don't understand the software we're building. There used to be a time when people who built the software also used the software often. Not the case anymore, right? Think about the software or the firmware that's being used on a critical mission like the spacecraft. We send rockets to the moon. All of that is running in firmware. You can imagine that they would definitely not go download some library from GitHub and use it, right? They're critical systems. They would write every bit of software, and they would measure it. They would code review it significantly. Unfortunately, a lot of us do not take software seriously. Right? We are oftentimes we are in software to make money, but we don't take the security of our software very seriously. So that's the reason why we're seeing this. If we build software, understanding that software is being used in extremely critical environments, hospitals use software. If your software fails in a hospital, it's not possible to measure the critical information from a patient. What is their oxygen level? Goes through software today, right? So that kind of stuff we don't realize is very, very critical. So I think that it's up to us, really. There are many mechanisms to make a software secure. It's really up to us to figure that out. How to know Wi-Fi is trusted? Um, there are many ways. For the very first thing, of course, is whether you're using WEP versus WPA versus WPA2 form of security. Is your key getting rotated regularly? Right? All of those are shared keys. Maybe you move away from shared. If you're an enterprise, move away from shared keys and use EAP-based authentication. And EAP-based authentication is when you go back, you use certificates, you go verify the identity based on like a identity that you store in a Radius server and so on. There's lots of different mechanisms to do that. So it really depends on what kind of passwords and so on that you use in your for securing your Wi-Fi. Are the available e-payment apps safe? That's a very hard question, right? There's definitely some amount of penetration testing being happening on all of this. I can tell you that the India stack, the actual stack that the government runs, that the NPCI, the National Payment Corporation of India runs, that's being tested significantly. Now, is the app that uses the API itself secure? I don't know. Right? What kind of data is being stored on the app? So when you use Paytm or PhonePe and so on, is the app actually just calling the NPCI, the UPI APIs and just leaving it at that? Or is it storing actual data about your transaction on the app? I don't know. That's something that you have to figure out from each of the applications. Right? The same thing with Aadhaar as well. Right? A lot of people ask this question. The Aadhaar data that the government holds may be very safe. But what is happening is that the Aadhaar numbers themselves are probably stored by many, many servers. The question is the Aadhaar number considered private data? I think that's the part that a lot of people argue about. Is the Aadhaar number private data? So let's say I have your Aadhaar number. Can I do something with it? Maybe not. Right? If I cannot do something with your Aadhaar number, then maybe your Aadhaar number it may not be considered private data. Right? Just like PAN card number. Right? We give out PAN numbers in a bunch of forms. So is your PAN number, should your PAN number be considered a private number or not? So other numbers should be treated the same way. So the question is not about what the backend systems are doing. The question is how your applications store the data that they're getting from the backend system. How can I prevent Shodan from crawling IoT devices? If you go to Shodan.io, they actually tell you specifically how to test your devices so that you don't show up on Shodan. How to prevent Shodan from crawling IoT devices. A lot of information is there. There are even books that tell you how to use Shodan, right? So you can definitely go look them up. So there's a very good books to read in these times of being stuck at home, and you can definitely do that. Can Tor browser ensure privacy? Yes, Tor browser can ensure privacy. But again, it depends on where the Tor end nodes are, right? So I've not used Tor that much, maybe, so I'm not exactly the right guy to talk about it. So, but superficially, yes, Tor can ensure privacy. It really depends on a bunch of other stuff as well. So I've heard reports about government and police agencies running their own Tor endpoint. If that were the case, then does it ensure privacy? I don't know. How to secure our devices and our privacy data? It really comes down to what kind of passwords you use on the device. It really comes down to if you're reusing your password. Is your password the string password 123? Is your password the string your name and your birthday? None of those information are private information. Your birthday is easily available on Facebook. Your name is available. Your user ID is probably available in most places. If your password is your user ID plus your date of birth plus something like that, None of that is private information. All of that can be used to reconstruct your password. Right? We use biometric wherever possible. Like if you have a phone with a fingerprint information, try to use it. Right? All of that can really help to increase the security. So, are they completely secure? Like I said, nothing is completely secure. Right? So what you can do is you can add layers and layers to that security. Slides link, I don't, let me talk to Prashant and we can see how to do that. How to create firewalls, is it really worth it? Um, that's a, that's not something I can quickly answer. Definitely firewalls are worth it. Right? How to create firewalls really depends on what you're doing. Simple ones like IP tables will work, right, on Linux. Is it really worth it? It's another layer in the security, right? Absolutely, firewalls are worth it. Are they the only thing that you should be using? Of course not. Right? So definitely, firewalls form one of the key layers in the multi-layer security. Should we use dark web for browsing? Personally, I've never used a dark web. I don't know how to access the dark web. Never been there. But I do hear that when you go to the dark web, you get to see all kinds of stuff that you should not be seeing. So I don't know. That's not a question I know enough to answer. Okay, that's all the questions I see here.
So I think that's it. Is there anything else? Anyone, if you quickly have anything else that you would like to discuss with Kaarthik, maybe related to your projects or anything like that?
Hello, sir.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, sir. Sir, I'm studying in computer science first year. So I want to build my career in cybersecurity. So, so, what is the start point and the end point? So, how should I pursue and what should I start from?
There are definitely a lot of different ways. Right? I think the key part is you need to understand, first of all, how to break systems, right? And whether you do it, whether that becomes a job or not, right? The key part is to understand how to break systems. And there are lots of certifications that are there. Unfortunately, the certifications are also a little bit expensive, but absolutely worthwhile. The most beginner level certificate I would recommend is the Certified Ethical Hacker, CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker. So I can type it in the chat from there. Certified Ethical Hacker. That's a beginner level certificate that you can start with. It
Okay,
tells you
sir.
how to break systems, how to start from there, right? And then from there you can build. There are a lot of other certifications. Find a job that really focuses on penetration testing and so on, right? So that's on one side. On the other side is building safe products. They form the two sides of cybersecurity. One side is how to attack, and the other side is how to defend, right? Just like a military, you need to know how to attack, you need to know how to defend. The attacking side, they're the penetration testers, the red teamers, and the blue teamers form the defense side. You need to know how to build defensive software, how to write software that checks for all kinds of stuff. So somebody asked, is CCNA a better start for networking? For networking, yes, CCNA is a good start for networking for sure. Okay, so I am on LinkedIn and I'm also on GitHub, as you saw. So let me show you the GitHub link again, right? So that's my thing. So either of these, you're welcome to poke me on any of these. I'm not on Facebook, um, so you know I'm on Twitter as well. On Twitter, my address is @Karthik S. So you're welcome to get in touch on any of these methods. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Bye bye.